big education is not necessarily where I'm at, and capitalism, as we know it, as it is in line with education, is no longer in line.
Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. How we doing? How we doing? Stephanie checking in with another episode of Class Disruption. And on today's episode, I'm sharing with you a conversation I had with Dan Jackson. But before we get into it, smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, hit that bell so you get notified every time I drop a video, and of course, share this video. That is the most important thing you could do. Share this video with other teachers, students, parents, spread that disruption all around the globe. But let's get into it. Like I said, I have a conversation with educator Dan Jackson, who is the creator of ASAP, Applied Synergies Partnerships, and they partner with people and businesses in the community to give their kids an experiential, hands-on, entrepreneurship-based education. The link for ASAP and all of Dan's social media are in the description down below, so make sure you go check those out, go show him some love, and get ready for a great conversation. Talk about everything from ASAP to how he thinks that we can transform education in America, to grit, to social justice and equity, and we meander a couple places in between. So get ready for an amazing conversation with a great leader and humble human, Dan Jackson. So welcome, Dan. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, Stephanie. Happy to be here.
Yeah, especially that we get to be inside in the nice, cool, air-conditioned rooms.
Even to step outside is killer right now, but happy to be inside with you.
Awesome. So, before we get into the reason why I had reached out and contacted you and wanted to talk about it, just tell us, who are you? What do you do? What are you all about? I want to know, who's Dan Jackson?
Okay. Well, first and foremost, I am a husband. Have been for 29 years to a woman I met our rising senior summer in high school.
Ooh.
Yep. And we have,
sweethearts.
Yeah, August 2nd, 1983. I celebrate that anniversary more than the wedding anniversary. And have two relatively grown boys, a 20-year-old who's currently on his way cross country to Arizona to visit an uncle, and driving with a friend, which is kind of cool. And I have a 15-year-old who is a rising 10th grader at the same high school that I teach at, which is Friendship High School.
So does he like that, or he or not?
No, actually, my kids enjoy being with me, and they enjoy being in my class. And most kids that are in my classes kind of enjoy being with me. They hang out in my class at lunch and stuff. So
awesome.
Yeah, I'm not one of those gray-haired guys. It just, it's a drag to be around. So.
Boomer.
Actually, I don't know what I am. I was born in 1966. So
okay.
That kind of,
okay. Yeah, that's true. I'm thinking more like my parents, and your kids are a little bit younger than me and my sisters. So that's true. That's true.
Yeah, don't put me into the same category.
I'm sorry.
But you also asked what it is that I'm all about, and I tell you what, right now it's a whole gear changing thing, isn't it? I mean, what it is I'm about, the foundation and the principles are all still there, the values are still there, but they're being applied way differently. Education has been a big thing for me now for 16 years, and I just see it taking a turn. Some of it for the better, some of it for the worse, and I know we're going to get into some of those things. So.
Yeah, and something that I really like that you differentiated between was those underlying values and then how those are expressed. And we constantly need to be vigilant about how we're expressing them so that we can actually stay in touch with those base values. And you're right. So I do think that sometimes we get confused and we're not able to have a nuanced enough conversation to recognize that difference. Do we really want to tear everything down, or is there really some good values here that we just need to reconstruct the way that they're being reflected in our society?
Yeah, good point. And I'm a big time Stephen Covey fan, and have been for probably 25 years, 30 years maybe even. And I love his notion of just the solid principles and growing from those. But some things never change. And something my son and I were talking about it today. He's reading The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, and he came to me and we were talking about the law of the farm. And you can't wait to plant. and you have to have the discipline to continue to, nurture your fields and pull the weeds out and make certain that things are watered and fertilized and things. And so, yeah, it's been kind of on my mind for sure today.
Nice. So what is ASAP? That's like really, because I had reached out about a pin tweet that you had
Mhm.
about government taking a more like forward role in advancing education reform,
Mhm.
but I think that's stemming from this program that you developed, ASAP. And do you
Well,
call it ASAP? I don't know if you call it ASAP.
I do call it ASAP for
Okay.
its acronym, and it truly is aside from government and aside from economics. It is the other E, and that being education. And so ASAP stands for Applied Synergies Partnership, and it's the idea of being able to partner with an entire community, all
Mm,
stakeholders that are involved in education, and then creating synergies, which again comes from Stephen Covey, and the idea that together the symbiosis that we can create is going to be greater than just 1 plus 1. And I call it applied because I want to be able to apply all of these tenets and all of these values and principles and things to learning and to education. And then a quick kind of a caveat to it is that ASAP is a double entendre, in the sense that I really wish to develop intentionally skills that young people are going to need later on in life as soon as possible. And don't put it
mm.
off so long, but give it to the middle schoolers, give it to the elementary school teachers, give it to the high schoolers, and give these kids the tools and the skills and the abilities that they're going to need as soon as possible.
Right. I feel like I hear that sentiment so often from my students, like, oh, after high school, or like, once I get through this, and I'm like, no, right now. You don't need to
Mm-hmm.
wait till after high school and just doing what they're telling you to do. A lot of my kids who like don't get school, they're like, why are we even here? This is stupid. And they're
Mm-hmm.
like, I can't do anything until I get out of here. I'm like, no, let's do what you want to do right now. And I think the other part of that too, like of that application, is that so many of the skills that we learn in school or the facts that we learn are in isolation, but really they don't mean anything until you apply them. And I love that synergistic effect idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, another cool thing is that we talk often to students. I shouldn't say we, but I don't mean the royal we. I don't do it anymore, but I used to use the term the real world. And
Mm.
certainly a student of mine years ago, probably 10 or 12 years ago, raised his hand in class and he said, Mr. Jackson, we live in a real world. And it was at that point I was like, okay,
He was
no
like,
more of
got him,
that.
got him. Yeah, I definitely try to stop myself from doing that as well, but it's just kind of one of those things that it's almost like my mom. She used to like say certain things to me in my head, and now I catch myself like saying them to my son, and I'm like, some of them are good, but some of them I'm like, maybe we should tweak this a little bit.
Yeah, you like
So
that commercial, like I'm talking like my dad now.
it's like, but I get it. My mom did a great job, and I'm so thankful for hearing her voice. At first it was a little scary, but now I'm like, no, that's the way it's supposed to be. So back to this idea though, where we're talking about like application, why and specifically in terms of like an entrepreneurship application, like why do you
Mhm.
think that this experiential and this entrepreneurship based education is a model that more schools should be following? Like what have you seen it do for your students and for other places that have adopted this model?
Oh wow, that's a question we probably could spend like an hour on, but I came out of 12 years in industry, and I had gotten my MBA at Indiana University, and then kind of made my way up the corporate ladder and got to a point where I wasn't particularly pleased in the corporate world. And then the towers came down, and my wife reminded me at that point, Dan, you've always wanted to go into education, and she was absolutely right. And I had a longing that just, I think that trauma that we had back in 2001 uncovered. And so when I went to Indiana, I was in Indiana. I'm sorry. When the towers came down, I was living in Detroit.
Mm.
And I couldn't afford to live there anymore in the suburbs of Detroit. And Indiana was where my wife's family was. Moved down there, and I got a job at a school that was a career and technical center. And they
Okay.
handed me the standards for marketing. And I looked at the standards and I was like, okay, that's cool. And I just kind of put them aside.
Oh,
It,
standards. Oh, I when I hear that word, I'm like standard aligned.
yeah,
I'm like, oh, good. So it checks your boxes off.
yeah, yeah. My
Now, can
hair's
we do
standing on
something
end right
real?
now. I'm just going, oh, cringing. And I said, you know what, let's give these kids what they really need. And the very first class that I was in, even as a student teacher, was experiential learning. And I went to my supervisor and said, can I just have the class? I mean, don't, you know, let me do a part of it. I want the entire class. And she said, sure, what do you plan on doing? And I told her XYZ project, and this is how we're going to do it. It was all about branding, developing your own product, developing your own brand.
Nice.
And the kids loved it. And I immediately began to put into my pedagogy what I thought kids would need if they wished to go into the corporate world. And if you're taking a marketing or a business or finance or entrepreneurship class, you're probably looking at going into business. So I said, let's just give them what they think they really need. And so experiential learning was never something that I kind of evolved to. It was just, I came out of experiencing the corporate world and wanted my kids in the classroom to experience the same thing.
See, now I'm one of those teachers who just like was like, oh, I want to be a teacher, went the traditional path. But I really think that we need to be recruiting more teachers from the corporate world, people who've had like job experience that's not just like, oh, I want to be a teacher. I think that there is a place for like professional educators who are like, who go to school specifically to learn about all the theory and stuff behind it. But I think that we should have just as many teachers coming from the field that we're recruiting, and really, I don't want to say real world. I keep wanting to say real world. But like there, even me as a teacher, sometimes I do feel like I could be able to bring more to my job if I had been out in corporate world, worked for a nonprofit, done something else before I came to the classroom.
I think it depends upon the subject that you're teaching. What do you teach?
I teach social studies.
Okay. And so I'm not sure what you do in social studies if you're not a professor or an instructor in the classroom.
Right. I guess like actually the reason that I chose social studies though was because I felt like it was the one that lended itself most across the curriculum. Like I'm not a fan of the subjects in like the classical sense. I think that there is some place for them, but I think that we focus too much on doing like, oh, English in here and science in here and social studies in here. And like you said, I would like to see like this more integrated model. And really what I've done over the past 4 years I've been in the classroom, I've been shifting from the like learning what the curriculum is, doing, okay, here's a lesson, here's a lesson, here's a lesson. Now we have a test or a quiz or something, to saying like, okay, what is that deliverable? Like, what is that project thing I want them to hand me at the end? And then working back from there. So they're not just doing what I call a parade of worksheets with like the finale at the end of an exam. And they're actually, because when I think about when I went to school, it was like when I wrote this like 15-page research paper, when I gave a speech in front of the whole school, like when I did this photo project and wrote like little captions under the photo and try to do some art display. I thought I was being artsy and stuff. But like, those are the things that stuck with me. Like, I literally can't tell you, even from social studies, and I love social studies and history, I can't really tell you what I learned in it though, anything specific.
No, I agree with you 100%. I mean, if I could pick up my computer here and show you the books that are out there, these shelves are full of history. And I love reading history, everything from probably about the founding of the American Revolution on up to about the Cold War era. Love history. And there are plenty of opportunities that I look for in entrepreneurship with social studies teachers in terms of, hey, you know what, if we're gonna do an entrepreneurship characteristic project, you have to research an entrepreneur. Why don't we also tie it in with your social studies teacher and look at the time that they became an entrepreneur? What were the problems? What was society like? What did they need? What did they need to come up with and the like? And nothing's ever come to fruition to that because so many teachers are still so siloed.
Right, exactly.
I love history.
And so my question is, you're talking about a lot of these like project-based things, hands-on things, things that require collaboration, often I would assume like materials that you need, physical materials. I don't know to what extent kids are like actually making products. But what are you doing to shift or what is your school doing next year? Are you online? Are you in person? Like with the pandemic, how are you addressing this with your more experiential hand-based curriculum?
That's an excellent question, and it's something that I was in the doldrums, to be frank with you, though my name is Dan,
Mm,
and tell you that I got this whole. It's like I was just as overwhelmed with COVID and overwhelmed with online, and how do I do this? Because you're right, everything is so face to face and so collaborative, and so I been actually putting together kind of a team of educators from around the county, the
mm.
state, the country, and just trying to come up with ideas and looking for resources. It's going to happen. It's going to happen because we're going to have to make it happen. And it
I
is,
love that. Yes.
and it's through necessity that invention comes. And so
Mm.
we're going to have to invent ways, and it's going to be trial and error. But heck, man, that's entrepreneurship. We're just, and I've always told my kids, I said, hey, we're trying something new today. I've never done this in class. Help me out here. If it doesn't work, you give me some feedback. Let's make it right for the next one. What is our school doing is been a kind of an ongoing waiting for the other shoe to drop.
I think that's like everybody's like that.
We'll make a decision in 2 weeks. We're going to
Mm.
postpone the decision. Okay, we're going to plan B. Okay, plan B, we're modifying. We'll check back with you in 2 weeks. And as a matter of fact, Stephanie, just today, we heard that the last plan was every 3 weeks, a different group of students would rotate through the
Okay.
school, and that the other two would be online. Well, then now they've come back and they said, okay, for the first 2 weeks, everybody's online. And that
Mm.
those first 2 weeks are meant to be meet and greet, relationship building, community building, which is
Mhm.
really my forte, and it's something that I generally spend the first 2 weeks doing. But hell, man, I've never done it online. I don't
Oh, I
know.
have a good video I'll have to share with you. I just saw this really cool video that somebody put out for like how to do icebreakers and like use spaces
Hmm.
collaboratively and stuff. I'll definitely link you that video.
Yeah, please
Um,
do.
but yeah, and I really do want to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think in the one hand, teachers have a good point, good position, but on the other hand, I don't think that they are able to really put themselves in those positions. It's like everything that they come out with, teachers are like, no, no, no. And I'm just like, well, what do you want then? Can we at least get
Yeah.
some form of solution?
But I think I think it's the other shoe that's we're waiting for to drop that becomes the frustrating part. Tell us what it's going to be, and
Mm,
then we can go. If it's going to be
I
all online,
guess, yeah.
yeah. If it's going to be every 1/3, fine. If it's going to be all online, just let us know. And then another caveat to it is that we have in Wake County, where I teach, the 15th largest school district in the United States with 160,000 students. Which I
Well,
really
that's
shouldn't be.
nothing.
I was about to say I really shouldn't be saying that. Yeah, you guys are a couple of rungs up that ladder, I know. But the point being is that I feel for these administrators, I feel for these superintendents and all the variables that they have to deal with, and all the different demographics and socioeconomics and access to this and that, and the haves and the have-nots, and trying to take care of everybody at the same time. I feel for
Well, this is a perfect segue to my next question then about big government, right? Because this is really what had prompted me to reach out to you. Like I tweeted something about we need courageous leaders. And I was specifically really talking about it in the political context, about people stepping up and really just speaking how they feel, not being scared to say but it definitely applies in education as well. And so then I like clicked onto your profile and I saw your pinned tweet, and it talked about the Transcontinental Railroad, World War II, and how these are examples of what Americans can do if they set their heart on them.
it. Hmm.
But all those things also require big government, right? Whereas your program is all about entrepreneurship. And in my mind, I kind of see those things as being opposing forces, or necessary balancing forces to an extent, but I don't necessarily see them as things that would work together, in that usually government stifles the things that businesses want to do. Now they do it to an extent, obviously, because like we need regulation, we don't want to have monopolies, but I would argue they too often, and really like what we have right now is nowhere near a free market. And if it's mixed, it's pretty heavily government oriented even.
Okay, so what is your direct question then?
So like, I guess like, what is your vision of how the government would, like how the government would reimagine education? Like if that's their next big challenge, how would big government, seeing how, you know, it's bulky and moving around very slowly and really unsure what to do in this situation, as you know, before, it's no different than before. How would it be different with education reform?
Well, I'm afraid that I'm talking to a social studies teacher, so I might end up stepping on my toes or my tongue. But,
no, man, this is all, it's all in good, you know, good faith.
well, at the start of World War II, and President Roosevelt called upon business to transform their manufacturing. And he gave BHAGs out there. And that is not to suggest that the BHAGs were going to be regulated and looked upon with the minutiae by the big government. It was going to be, we need you. We need you to carry us through these trying times that we have. And big business, maybe not big government, but of course it was big government back then with the New Deal and everything else. But big business took over and said, you know what, we have these plants, we have these manufacturing facilities, we've been making washing machines and we've been making cars. We can make planes, we can make tanks, we can make Jeeps. And they transformed their production capabilities to the point where we made more airplanes in 1 year than the Luftwaffe in Germany did in the entire war. So that's my point. When we put our heart to something, when we can transform to a place where we're all pulling the same rope in the same direction, we can do miraculous things.
So it's not necessarily like state power that would just be coming down and saying this. It's the unifying force of the state saying, here's our vision, and actually making that vision accessible to a wide variety of people, businesses, the common man, etc.
Yeah, well, having been a Detroiter myself, I grew up in Detroit. My family's been there for generations. Look at what Detroit did with the automobile industry, making airplanes and everything else. So it's about just all of us getting together and coming up with what it is we need to do. The Transcontinental Railroad I used as an example. I think it was an edict that was put out there. God, I want to say it was as early as like James Madison, who said, we will, you know, breach this entire country with a railroad. He didn't regulate it. He didn't necessarily, you know, maybe he should have, but we did it because we all said, you know what, that's a good idea. It makes sense. Let's make it happen. You know, of course.
So what do you think? Oh no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, of course, our indigenous people didn't much care for that, but.
Yeah. Well, interesting things coming up though recently with like Indian law and state law and federal law. I think that's going to have pretty large implications for Indian law across the country potentially.
I have not been kept abreast of that.
Yeah, there was just recently a Supreme Court case that like, and this is totally off topic, but it took basically the eastern half of Oklahoma. If you're in a tribe, if you're a member of a tribe, then you go under Indian law and the state can't enforce its law on you. And then like above that would be federal law. So it goes
is that to the person or is that to the territory? Meaning
to the person. So like if you're a person who lives in that territory, but you're not a member of the tribe, then the regular state Oklahoma state law would apply to you.
Okay.
Yeah. So this goes back to like treaties. They went back and they like read the treaties and disputed the way that they've been interpreted and stuff. Super interesting. But what I wanted to ask you about was what were you talking about? Big government.
Big government.
And
while you think about that, I'll point out the Corsair behind me from World War II.
Yes. Oh yeah, nice planes. Building them up.
Yeah, build model airplanes.
Oh, that's what I got you.
Okay.
So we're talking about you know, corporations, big business. And one of the other things that you had said in your TED Talk was about how schools, and you said that earlier in this conversation we're having, about getting kids ready to enter the corporate world or to enter the business world or to be workers. And I certainly agree that education and schooling, it's all about preparing kids for what's going to come after so that they can be like independent, participating in our democracy individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I recently watched this documentary. It's called Schooling the World, The White Man's Last Burden.
Mm-hmm.
And it really made this argument about how education has trended towards preparing students for this capitalist economy and has led to the breakdown of the family and of traditional knowledge and of the natural world, and has led us to be more focused on obedience. And I think it was like George Carlin even said something to this effect of like, oh, schools just want to make you just smart enough to run the machines. Um, uh, and there's another book too that's called the Weapons of Mass Education. That makes a similar argument too about how schools just, they're preparing kids to participate in this capitalist society at the detriment of these other skills that are actually so important for that society. So how do you balance that in your vision of students and entrepreneurship and being prepared as workers?
Well, actually, that took on a little bit different of a slant than what you had sent to me, and I was kind of thinking in one direction. But the way you just asked it now, it goes directly to the idea of industrialized education. And what Tony Wagner calls, or not, he doesn't call it, there actually was something called the Committee of 10. And it was, 100 plus years ago, in which they, during the Industrial Revolution, needed to be able to have, basically standardized people. They could run standardized machines. They could do standardized things. And so that's what education became. And I agree that the education, as we currently know it, is archaic. It needs to go away. And we no longer need for somebody to be able to work on an assembly line and just screw the same lug nut 10,000 times a day. We need people who are able to think critically, who can do analysis, who can get along with people, who can tell the difference between fake and real, who know how to go out and do the things that are necessary in order for a team to move forward and influence, a project getting done. I thought where you were kind of going was that we had taken education to the point where our systems and our institutions were regularly discriminating against particular races and against particular peoples. And I've actually been doing research on that for the last week or so and I don't have those answers. I'm looking because I want to get those answers, and I'm hearing that argument out there, and I'm like, I can't comment on that because I'm too ignorant to really do so, and I'll come across it. So, but with regards to education and what it is today, or maybe 10 years ago, it's no longer valid. We are moving so much more closely to developing the real things and real skills that kids will need in the life after, the life after formal education.
Right.
We're not teaching them how to put on a lug nut 10,000 times a day.
Right. Well, what if we're even like training them to like use computers? Like so much of the education is just focused on those skills you need in the workplace. Is there room for those more traditional skills and traditional knowledge? And like, what's the balance between those two?
I think that you have technical skills like computer programming or like engineering, those things where you need to be able to have the technical acumen to make things happen. But at the same time, for you to influence groups, for you to be able to get projects moving forward, for you to understand how to get things done is different than a technical skill. A lot of people call them soft skills. Never been a big fan of that because they're not soft. They're really hard to get, and they're really hard to make work for you. Soft skills, they called them that because they were kind of intangible. They were under the surface. They're not under the surface anymore. You take a look at 2022 and what the World Economic Forum is saying the skills students will need. They're mostly soft skills. I hate air quotes, but there they are. Okay. They're skills that are difficult to obtain.
Mm.
That makes
Yeah,
sense?
they're like mushy. They get squished around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I agree.
No, and what you were talking about earlier with regards to the idea of textbook, study guide, test, rinse, repeat is no longer valid anymore. I mean, don't even get me into college admissions because that's going to be a whole nother episode. What we're doing,
Right.
what colleges are doing to, you talk about families and you talk about the destruction of families and you're talking about the tearing down of the very fabric of society. I think a lot of that has to do with education, has a lot to do with overemphasis on technical skills. Get into college. You know, you're going to sit in that bloody chair and you're going to study those SAT questions and that SAT vocabulary until you're blue in the face, and don't get up until I tell you to. There's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly. And I see it in my son, and I also see it in me. We're at two different stages of it. But because he's not in like any type of formal education yet, you know, he's 4 years old. So he goes to like daycare, preschool type deal. And, you know, even me, like we'll do like every day I try to do like write his name with him or do some like letters or numbers, something that's like specifically academic versus like that natural state of learning that we're always in. And I know for me, I'll be like, okay, I want to do this thing. I want to make this video for my YouTube channel. So then I go and I do that like hardcore, like study, take notes, like those very like academic type things. But I'm not doing it in isolation. I'm doing it with a very specific, concrete, deliverable goal at the end. So I think that we need to be able to like strike that balance and that nuance and not just be like, whoa, like, oh, we're just going to throw out all of those types of like hardcore study skills, sit down, drill and kill. Because I do think that me being able to like do that does lead into me now as an adult being able to like sit down and drill and kill it and like put in that type of like hardcore work I need. I just think that we need a better balance. And I would make the same argument too for standardized tests. Like, I don't think that we should get rid of all standardized tests ever. I think it is important to have a more objective baseline. And now we can have discussions and arguments about like why a test might be racist or might exclude one group or the other. And we could try to make those tests better, but I don't think we should get rid of them altogether. We just need to fix that balance.
Well, I actually have a couple of points on that. One of which is we do develop discipline when we have those study skills developed at an early age. Okay? And there's nothing wrong with understanding that, you know what, you do have to sit down for 15 or 20 minutes at a time and make these things happen. There is something to be said about tardies and bell schedules and understanding that we have to be responsible and accountable for schedules and timelines. Another point, though, is that I was watching this, I don't know, 6-8 months ago. My neighbors across the way, and they have all these cushions and things on their porch, and they have like a 4 and a 6-year-old, and they were tearing up the cushions, and they were trying to build this fort. And I sat there and I looked at I said, that's hands-on learning right there. They're doing problem solving. They're doing critical thinking. They're even throwing engineering in there when they're trying to prop up one to another and physics and the like. And I'm getting my hair standing up. I said, those kids are having fun and they're learning. So then you may have seen in my biography on Twitter, reflective. Right? I'd like for those kids now to just step back and spend 5 minutes telling me, what did you just learn from that? Okay, let's go now. Let's talk about what you could do differently the next time you want to put those cushions together as a fort. And it's essentially design thinking without putting a label on it.
Right.
Or anything, you know, you prototyped, it didn't work. How are you going to do it again?
Exactly.
You know?
And that's literally like what I do with my son. I see him do something and I'm like, all right, like let him rock out. You know, at first I have that intention, like, oh, like, stop, you're messing things up. You're doing something. But then I'm like, hold on. Like, let me just let him do his thing. And then I'll ask him afterwards, like, what are you doing? Why were you doing that? Like, what about this? What about that? And then he'll ask me questions back. And I'm a big YouTube head. So of course he's like a big YouTube head. And so then that's his next thing is like, oh, can we watch a video on YouTube? Can we like do more of this about YouTube? So then I feel like it leads to this natural like bridge into those like study skills, to those learning, to those, okay, now I'm going to go learn something, I'm going to study it, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to build another fort, and it's going to be the best forever.
What you just said there, though, about your 4-year-old is something that we school out of kids too early, and that's the curiosity. You know, let me go experiment. Let me go see what happens if I do this or if I happen. And I loved what you said about the idea of stepping back and allowing him to kind of overcome his own challenges and to fall down. I mean, if we were there every time the bike was about to fall down, they'd never learn to ride a bike.
Exactly. But it's got to stick to the objective, though. What about, it's got to be standards aligned. That's not at the standards.
Well, maybe the objective, though, is for the kids to learn from overcoming their own challenges.
Right. No, I'm totally with you, man. Totally there to throw it all out. And not all of it out, right? Which is another good segue into like that next thing that I wanted to hit on, because we've been talking about a lot of these, like, you have to have it, to sit down, be able to study, be able to self-motivate, be able to discipline. And then we had also talked about like that semantical issue of like the soft skills and how it's a little bit of a misnomer. And like, personally, me, I don't like to get caught up in those semantics. Like, okay, like I might not like the term soft skills, but let's make sure we're defining it and like think more about like what that definition is. And if we want to push some evolution in the language, like let's try to do that as well, but it shouldn't be like the end all be all. So that brings me to this idea of language that you use to describe your ASAP program, and some of like the key tenets you said in it were this idea of grit, of growth mindset. And really for the past few years, but like especially now with like the Black Lives Matter movement, which we can also like, I guess, bring into here, this conversation will come up, is these words have been considered or like highly criticized as being at best complicit in perpetuating white supremacy. Maybe, at worst doing something even more than that. And, I had put a quote in there. We both read the quote. I'm going to read it for everybody else so that they know what the quote is, and then you can respond. So it says, both growth mindset and grit mistake growth mindset grit as the dominant or even exclusive quality causing success in student learning, ignoring the power of systemic influences, and then create an environment in which some students, too often Black, brown, and poor, are defined in deficit terms, that they lack growth mindset or grit. He adds, students are better served by equity practices couched in efforts to alleviate the systemic forces that shape how they live and learn regardless of their character. So how would you respond to such a characterization of those practices of grit and of growth mindset, and what role does equity have in your vision of education and like of your program specifically?
Okay, well, I think you asked probably a multitude of questions that are on very different planes.
Throw it at you.
As you know, I read the article, and I read the article thoroughly, and I pulled out specific quotes that Rick Wormelli had in the article. You pulled out one. I pulled out about 17 that actually were going to the idea of, in the right context, taught properly, growth mindset and grit are not a bad thing. So, and growth mindset and grit and or perseverance are not the be all to end all. It's not what we're striving for, but they are ingredients to a successful journey in education. If you don't have the idea that I can do this, you're not going to get particularly far in any endeavor. But that is just a simple ingredient. I mean, Stephen Covey wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He didn't write the one ingredient you need is this, and if you don't have it, you're screwed. Okay?
Right.
And what I really liked about Rick Wormelli's argument there, or the article that he wrote, was that in the proper context. And that's the whole point that I try to put, is that learning should be contextualized. But when kids ask, why am I learning this? You gotta say, because if you want to be an engineer, you need to know some calculus. If I don't want to be an engineer, why do I have to take calculus? I look at him at that point and go, I have no flipping idea.
Me too. I was asking that when I was in calculus. I was like, the only reason I like got through it was because my teacher was also my soccer coach, and she's the one who I had prefer for pre-calc. So it
Mhm.
was more of a relationship thing for me. But I did
Okay.
not understand calculus at all.
You and I have more connection here on a couple of levels. One of which I coach soccer, and
Hey.
my favorite teacher back in high school actually was a soccer coach. But we need to be careful when we read articles that oftentimes come across as opinions.
Mm.
If and I didn't do any additional research on it, but it would be interesting to find either corroborating or confrontational evidence to that. I don't think we can say that it has become highly criticized because we read one article by Rick Wormelli.
Oh yeah, I mean, so like the I actually didn't find that article until I was preparing for this. Most of the criticism that I've heard over the past few years has been like just from teachers, like on Twitter, on Instagram, or like how I did to you, pull out one quote and post it up like that. So like I wasn't trying to do an I got you.
Oh no,
I actually very much agree with the way that you believe in the contextualization, and that's what I think that too often social media, Twitter, and teachers often miss, because we get into these camps, these hot button topics of like what's good for our kids, what's bad for our kids, um and and then we really miss that nuance in that context, and that's what class disruption too, like one of the big things that I'm all about here is let's get out of these two camps that often form, and let's figure out like that nuances, like because we're all actually really somewhere in here.
yeah,
We all really need each
yeah.
other.
I'll interject there, and it's the idea of Stephen Covey's fourth habit, and it's think win-win, and it's what he calls the third alternative. And we need to be able to understand and listen to other people before we can begin espousing our own ideas. And so once each of us are able to understand what the other is saying and where the other one is coming from, we come up with really cool third alternatives.
Mm.
It's the idea of we have one doctor is going to do. If they don't talk to one another and they don't realize, well, to cure heart disease, I need the peel, and the other guy needs the juice, and another one may need the pulp. Hey, we got solutions. Listen, let's understand, let's get all the different perspectives before we start flying off the handle.
Yeah, I see that in myself. Like whenever I have an idea, I always specifically go to like people who I know would have probably a way different idea than me, or a way different approach, because I want them to push back on me. I want them to pull. I want them to say, but what about this? And I
Mm-hmm.
definitely think that's something that we need to reincorporate into education, and just as the country in general.
Well, I encourage my students to question respectfully and with integrity and tact. If you follow me enough on Twitter, you've probably seen that I will respond to some things with questions. Can you help
Mm.
me better understand? I'm confused by this statement you made. And then there are those other people from those other camps that just go, ah, and start freaking out because they've interpreted it one way. And it just happened to me the other day, or today actually, with Matt Foster, when he was talking about structural institutions and why haven't we, look at all this brick and mortar out there. And why do we have all this brick and mortar when we could have done it differently? And I just kind of came back to him. I said, could you please clarify this a little bit? And he and I went back and forth. Another one came out with apparently there was poo banned in China because of the likeness to their leader. And I replied, and I replied back to them. And if you notice my Twitter icon, it's been poo. Always been poo. I don't need to change it because poo is always cool. Okay. And I came out and I said, well, you know what? It figures. All they've given us is pandemic and cheap products. And the next thing I know, somebody responds to me and says, you're a Chinese hater. I hope nobody that's Asian is in your classroom. And I was like, wow, okay. But I responded by simply saying, you know what? You're right. I was insensitive and I apologize for that. I'll try to think more of it. When I took my fingers off of my phone, it was a completely different story between my wife and me, what I wanted to say.
Right. So, but do you think that like you should give them like that? Like, I don't know. I like the question asking, but I don't like to like be like, oh, you're right. Let me go think some more. I don't know. Like, there's just something, uh, or like the thing where people tell you like, oh, go Google it, go do research. Like, I don't know. Something about that just doesn't sit with me. Like,
Well, that's kind of being snide right there. You know, it's kind of like saying, "Oh, if you're so stupid you can't Google, why are you even here?" I mean,
yeah,
yeah. I think you may have also noticed that what I like to do sometimes is, and I even did it in the questions that you posed to me. I said, I need to ponder this a bit. I need to go chew on
for
this.
sure.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that too. Like when somebody just says like, I don't know, like, I try to do that with my students too. When they ask me questions that I don't know, I'm like, to be honest, like, I don't have a good answer for you. Extra credit for you to go find out.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'll do that in class too. You know, and they'll say, and I will say in class, well, hey, somebody quickly flip open your laptop and tell, go find it. Go find the
That's what
answer.
I love too. Yeah. I started doing that too. Like when I was giving kids, like certain different tasks to do in groups, I would give them one computer as a group because they would always ask me questions that I'm like, why am I wasting my time like telling you the definition of a word? Like that's a pretty silly use of my time, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Like look it up on the
Yeah.
computer.
Well, we've got on a little tangent here on social media, and while
I
we're
know.
on
Yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
which is okay, but there was another instance in which, and I'm not going to mention any names, but they were talking about the teaching profession and this, that, and the other thing, and they said we're probably given these horrible working conditions because of the fact that 90% of teachers are females. I was
Mm.
like, let me check that. And I went out and I Googled it and I looked at about 5 different sources to see what the actual percentage was. And I came back to her and I said, I understand your perspective. However, it's only 3/4 of teachers that are
Okay,
female.
so that's seven. Is that so? It's 75%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then she said, then she wanted to remove her tweet. She removed her tweet. And I was like, thinking to myself, you didn't need to do that. It's okay to say, you know
Right.
what? I was wrong.
Oh man, I got blocked by one of those edgy celebrities. I forget what his name is, because I've been blocked by him so long, but I'll like see him posted up on Twitter. He's like a principal. I think it's Dan something. But he blocked me because he came out and said something about how teachers are mistreated because they're mostly women and this and that. And we need and I came back at him with some things about, he was talking about how more professors are men and more teachers are women and that it's some sort of systematic sexism. And what I said to him is like, I was like, that may account for some of it, but I definitely think perhaps it's a greater extent of just choices of what people want and the career paths that they choose based on their own preferences. And like there are gender differences and I got
Mm-hmm.
blocked right away for that.
Well, I think though that
On
Dan,
Instagram and Twitter.
yeah, but I think we're both talking about working conditions and the like for education, and I think it boils down to how much do you value perhaps the educational system, which then brings us right back to and be another good segue into how some school districts have everything and how some school districts have nothing, based upon, tax rates and property ownership and the like. And that's, I think, where we really get into issues in education and systemic racism and institutional racism is just the gerrymandering that's been going on with the political boundaries and goes all the way back to, the Jim Crow days, the early 1900s, where blacks were over on this side of the tracks and whites were on that side of the tracks. And that kind of thing just needs to change. It just needs to
Yeah,
stop.
I think the number one best thing that we could do in education is disconnect property taxes from school funding and just say, like, this is the per student cost. I mean, you might be able to change it a little bit based on like the area where
Mm-hmm.
you live. Things are less expensive or more expensive, but it should be like in real dollars in that area. Every school gets 13,000 per student dollars per
Mm-hmm.
student.
Well,
Um,
actually, Michigan, when I was living there and just went into Wayne State University for my teaching degree, and I forget exactly what they called it. It wasn't egalitarian, but essentially all the property taxes from the entire state went into one pool and they
mm,
divided them out equally per student.
That makes the most sense to me.
It really does. And it didn't bother me
Yeah.
a bit. And I was living in a relatively affluent area, and I knew where my property taxes were going. And you know what? Those areas will find a way, if they need more money, to get it. And I think
Right.
I like the idea of equal treatment across that whole state, pull them together, put it out there by student.
Yeah, I mean, I think a progressive tax system is pretty like well established as being good for our democracy, especially as we're seeing. I mean, if I, again, I'm going to my history, going off tangent. We're going to wrap it up soon, but just one last thing about how, like, inequality in societies is what really does lead to the turmoil, economic inequality. Like you saw it before World War One, you saw it before like the Russian Revolution, you saw it
Mhm.
before World War Two, and I feel like we're kind of seeing some of those same trends coming in now, where people are really kind of like leaning towards an authoritarianism because democracy, it seems to be failing them. Like
You,
the
you said anti-authoritarianism?
no authoritarianism, like they
Okay.
were leaning towards authoritarianism because like democracy doesn't seem to be like answering our questions in this timely manner. We're in this gridlock, policies aren't passing, and people like they want change, they want it now. They're, you know, they're out in the streets trying to tear it down. um and I think that we need to make some big structural adjustments to address that. I mean, the millennials, they were promised all these things, and now where is it, you know? So
Well, that's another episode. That's
yeah. So yeah, we definitely ran the gamut here. I really do appreciate the way that you're so thoughtful and you're so like humble in your ideas and your opinions, and just like able to have such a like chill conversation, but about such like hard hitting things.
I appreciate you saying that. Humility is not often a tag that's put on me. It is with my closer friends, and I'm glad that we became that intimate and you were able to pick up on that. That means a lot to me. I enjoyed the questions. I enjoyed actually being able to go in there and do the digging. And I think even in an email, I said, I really appreciate the opportunity to
Mm.
reflect on these things. And it was some heavy lifting. But in the days and the months and the years to come, we've all got some real heavy lifting to do, and we better
Mm-hmm.
be prepared to do it.
Right. And you know, the reason I want to have you on here is because I think the ideas that you're espousing in your program can be such an important option for so many schools to really consider as we're trying to push for that shift in models from this very like class to class to class to
Mhm.
tighten the bolts with a wrench to something much more necessary for our society.
Well, once you get this posted, I will be happy to go in there and comment and put on links to things,
Yeah. So
stuff that.
tell everybody though, like, where can they find you? Like, I'll definitely put that all in the description down below, but you know, tell us where you can find you, give your shout outs.
Yep. Well, my Twitter handle is mind_on_ASAP, and for obvious reasons. A couple of things there, though, that's interesting is that I want all of our minds to be on ASAP. But also, my mind is on Applied Synergies Partnership with regards to how do we make this happen? How do we get out there? You can find me in Daniel Jackson on LinkedIn. There's probably about 200,000 of them out there, so just look up Cary, North Carolina, and you'll find me. And those are my only two social media. I got a family that I love and everything else, so I don't try to have too many handles and things to keep up.
Got you. Well,
So
thank you so much for coming on here. And, you know, we'll definitely have to have a follow up. This was an awesome conversation, and best
I
of
would
luck to
love it,
you
absolutely love it.
heading
Yep.
into this school year. It's going to be an interesting one, to say the least.
Yeah, and I appreciate your beautiful face.
And it's these conversations that just give me so much hope for the future, despite whatever it is that we're going through right now as a country. When two people from different generations, from different journeys, from different places in the country can come together and share a vision to move us forward, that's what it's about. And I'm going to keep having these conversations with teachers from all over the country, and I want you to come have a conversation with me. So hit me in the DMs. You know, all my social media stuff is down there. Dan's social media stuff is down there. Make sure you go show him some love. Check out ASAP. See how you can do something like this in a school in your district. What can you do right now in your school that will make a difference in the lives of your students? Something different. Class disruption. So we out here, we gonna keep doing our thing, fighting that good fight, and of course, stay foolish, y'all.